Back in May of 2010, while in desperate need of cash, I agreed to house sit for one of my old high school teachers. He had contacted me via Facebook and asked me if I would be willing to water his plants, collect his mail, and clean up the place while he went out of town for a couple of days. He didn't specify where he was going, but he agreed to pay me $400 for 2.5 days, with half up front, so I agreed. I never really liked him in high school. He was teaching classic literature, and he always seemed to enjoy pointing out any illustrations that in any way featured nudity. His eyes always seemed hungry, and he tended to wheeze like he was out of breath, even though he was kind of a small guy. My friends and I used to refer to him as Mr. Lip Tit. When I arrived at his place, the key was beneath the mat, and $200 were in an envelope on the kitchen table. I turned on my music, watered the plants, cleaned and vacuumed the ground floor, and made myself dinner. I found his house to be extremely boring. It was filled with old books, stacks of newspapers, and ancient-looking furniture that didn't really look comfortable to sit in. I settled into my sleeping bag on the guest bed, but I had a hard time staying asleep. It seemed that every 5 minutes there was another strange noise coming from the house, and it would put me on edge. The following morning, I went back to my own house, had breakfast, and took a shower before coming back and cleaning the second floor. Upon entering the guest bedroom, there was the faint smell of something in the air that definitely had not been there before. And what's more, I could have sworn that my sleeping bag was in a slightly different position when I had left it that morning. I started getting a bad vibe. I decided that night that I would sleep downstairs in the living room. I finished cleaning just after 10 p.m. I made some popcorn and enjoyed some cable TV, which I didn't have at my place. Around 11 I shut off the TV, wrapped myself up in my sleeping bag, and tried to drift off. I was tossing and turning for a bit, and just as I began to doze off, there came a click of the doorknob turning in the other room. I glanced over, and I swear by any god you choose, Mr. Liptak emerged from the pantry wearing only his socks. He then slowly turned the corner and made his way upstairs. I grabbed my phone and my keys and exited out. I ran around front to get into my car and sped home, where I immediately called the cops. I didn't know exactly how to explain the situation to them. I mean, he wasn't breaking and entering. It was his house. But when I explained to the operator that he had deceived me into thinking that he was gone, they sent out a patrol car. I had to collect the stuff that I had left at his house anyway. When the police arrived, Mr. Liptak answered the door wearing my sleeping bag over his shoulders. The police discovered a butler's cupboard, which was a secret room in the pantry that I wasn't aware of, where he had been hiding with a digital camera. He had taken a few dozen photos of me all around the house, most of which when I was sleeping. I showed the police the Facebook messages he sent me, assuring me that he would be out of town, and they arrested him. I collected all my remaining stuff, but left the sleeping bag. I didn't waste any time getting a restraining order against him. Mr. Liptak made bail, but actually died of a heart attack a few weeks later, after being rear-ended in his car at a stoplight. I never got the rest of my money.
Back when I was 17, I used to babysit for our neighbor, who at the time was a single mother who happened to be going through a particularly nasty divorce. She had 2 young sons, one of which was 8 years old, while the other was only around 18 months. They were absolutely adorable and very well-behaved kids, but you could tell that they were going through a lot, and the older one definitely showed signs of stress over the whole thing. And I'll never forget the time he asked me why his daddy couldn't live with them anymore, and it honestly broke my heart. Not because I didn't have an answer for him, but because to hear it would have just been too much to bear. Too much for anyone to bear. Anyway, after a few months of being alone, she finally decided to get back on the old dating horse. I was so happy for her. After such a rough time, she deserved to find happiness again, to find someone who had the wherewithal to be a real father to these 2 adorable little boys. So one night she leaves on her date and says she'll be back around midnight and not a moment later. Only she doesn't tell me exactly where she's going, and I have no way to contact her because this was back in the 80s and no one had a cell phone. Well, they did exist, but not in the available commercial sense. It was all landlines back then. Otherwise, this might not have gone the way it did. So on the night in question, I'm chilling on the couch, absent-mindedly flicking through the TV channels. I put the kids to bed an hour previous. They're sleeping like rocks, and everything seems fine and dandy. When suddenly there's a knock at the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but then again, it wasn't my house, so I felt kind of obligated to answer and take a message or whatever. Only as I started walking down the hallway towards the front door, whoever is on the other side starts banging against it and cursing up a storm. "Cheryl, I know you're in there. Open the door." Now, what was exactly said, I don't remember, but I'm not keen on repeating some of the words they used. It was really, really harsh. So I'm just frozen, looking at the door in total fright when the oldest boy came flying out of his room and down the stairs, running to the door and yelling, "Daddy's home!" I pull him away from the door. I had no idea what this guy's intentions were, and after all, they were probably divorced for a freaking reason. But I almost fainted with fear when I hear the words, "I got my shotgun in my truck, and tonight, I'm going to teach you a lesson you'll never forget." He screams this, but then I hear his footsteps move up the gravel path. It appeared he wasn't bluffing at all. And if that was the case, then our lives were clearly in danger. When he gets back, he's banging on the door and threatening to start shooting through it if no one opens. I grab both kids and run out the back door and across the street to my house where my mom calls the police. When the police arrive a few minutes later, they actually find the ex-husband taking a massive dump on Cheryl's porch. He was arrested, and I wait with the kids at my house for their mom to show up. Everyone was in tears by that point, even my mom, who was normally a pretty reserved woman. I mean, maybe he was just having a manic episode and no one was in real danger, but honestly, it was one of the most terrifying nights of my entire life. So this is the story of the worst day of my entire life so far. I was just 15 at the time, babysitting my little sister who was a toddler, like about that kind of age where she could walk and open doors. My parents were making a quick run to the store and left me in charge. I was chilling in the TV room. Sis was in her bedroom playing with her dolls or whatever. After a few minutes of watching TV, I noticed that it was a little too quiet. I checked her room and she wasn't there. I checked everywhere else with growing alarm, looking and calling for her, but she was nowhere to be found. To my absolute horror, I realized the person I'm supposed to be babysitting is definitely no longer in the house. There was this kids' swing park across the street that she liked, and this wouldn't be the first time that she worked the doorknob successfully and toddled over to play there by herself. So I sprinted over there to look for her, running on pure adrenaline and panic. But there was still no sign of her. I spotted a group of 3 grade schoolers there, so I described her and asked them if they had seen her around. One of the boys told me he saw a girl matching her description get into a blue car. We don't own a blue car, nor do any of the family friends. I can't adequately describe the feeling of dread, panic, and hopelessness that completely overwhelmed me. It was kind of feeling like my heart actually fell out of my chest. I sprinted from one end of the block to the other, hoping to catch a glimpse of this blue car. I ran through and around the adjoining elementary school, hoping maybe she was there. Never mind that I'd already been told that she had gotten into a stranger's car. I was completely irrational, was hoping that I had misheard that kid or something, or maybe, please, God, she was back. After some kind of eternity, I ran back home to call 911. By this time, my parents were back, and lo and behold, my sister was with them. It turns out she did open the door and wander off, but only to the store and back. A stranger had asked her where she lived and then walked her straight back to her house since it was obviously dangerous for her to be out alone. In my panic, I'd completely missed her coming home, and I was furious as to why my parents didn't think to notify me, so I guess it ended okay. I locked myself in the bathroom and sobbed for a while. Then I was overcome by an overwhelming urge to punch this little turd who had lied to me. I bolted back to the playground with no clear plan in mind. He wasn't there when I got back. I suppose that's good because I was sufficiently older, bigger, and utterly blind with rage that I probably would have murdered him at that point. An apology, however physically coerced, would have been nice though. Oh, and I'm fairly certain the boy wasn't just mistaken. After all was said and done, I recalled that one of the kids in his little group of friends had started to chime up when she saw me running around in a panic. I just vaguely remember her saying something like, "Hey mister, you should know about your sister." Something in the tone of her voice was apologetic, like she realized how messed up their joke was. But I was completely irrational at that point and ran off to keep searching, and it failed to register until later. Point being, there's a reason why the front page of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy says, "Don't panic." Never truer a word said. So this story isn't about me babysitting, but rather a close relative babysitting me and my sister when we were much younger. My parents told us the story when we grew up, and honestly, this has to be one of the last things any babysitter would want to happen to them or anyone in their guardianship. We wince every single time they retell it, and I'm guessing you will too. My parents had decided that they were going to have a little date night for the wedding anniversary and called up a family member to see if they would babysit us for the evening. She adored babies and would always play with us when she would occasionally visit, so she must have appeared to be the best person for the job. Although by the end of this, you might well dispute that idea rather violently. My parents were in the living room getting ready to leave for the night, and we were in our room playing with her. After a little while, she starts throwing me up and down in the air in that playful way that grown-ups do with kids sometimes. Apparently our dad happened to notice this and warned her to be extremely careful since the ceiling fan was at full blast, but decided she was aware and responsible, so he just headed back to the living room to carry on getting changed. After a few more playful tosses in the air, she put me down and started to do the same thing with my sister. Except she wasn't quite as lucky. According to my dad, no more than like 30 seconds had gone by when a loud gasp followed by a blood-curdling scream echoed all around the house. My parents came rushing to the room, and what they witnessed was something my mom has never, ever been able to get out of her head. She just stood there in shock for a moment, surveying the pure horror of the scene before her. Our babysitter had accidentally tossed my sister into the fan while it was still on, and it wasn't one of those flimsy, cheapo ceiling fans that you can pick up from a Walmart. It was one of those solidly built steel blade fans, built with safety features, sure, but still super heavy. Also, the fan setting was thankfully not set to high, but only to medium. God knows what the damage would have been if it was. And the way my mom tells the story, for the first few moments after walking into the bedroom, she thought my sister was dead. Blood was splattered all over the wallpaper, almost as if someone had been brutally beaten. My sister was on her bed's blood-soaked sheets with a huge gash on her forehead, and you can only imagine what kind of horror was going through our babysitter's mind. An ambulance quickly came to get her cleaned up and was given a lot of stitches in her forehead. My parents were more than relieved the blades didn't strike an eye, that she actually only managed to pick up superficial injuries. The babysitter didn't come around after that, even though everyone got over it pretty quickly since it was an accident. She still has the scar on her forehead today. We would joke around about the scar and how it was actually my plan to take her out to be an only child, or how she got her scar wrong and it's supposed to zigzag like Harry Potter's lightning bolt scar. I suppose, at best, it's an interesting story to tell if anyone asks her about the faint scar on her forehead. I work at a local Burger King in my city in Ohio. A few nights ago, I was working the closing shift, which is 5 p.m. until 10 p.m. It's a shorter shift, but it's the heaviest one of the day. And not just because it's busy, because all the weirdos seem to come out after the sun goes down. And this right here is the story of the most bizarrely disturbing encounter I've ever had while working in that Ohio Burger King. So, it must have been only like half an hour until closing, and round about this time the throngs of late-night diners start to kind of peter out, allowing us to close a few booths and generally get a head start on clean down before actually closing. The restaurant is getting quieter and quieter, and as time goes on, it actually seems like we might be able to get out of that place at a reasonable hour, which obviously we're all excited about. You see, we didn't get any overtime there, and they'd only pay us for 15 minutes after closing. The idea being to keep us from slacking and earning a few extra bucks in the makeup work after hours. So as I was saying, it's about half an hour from closing when I see a guy start walking towards the clear glass doors. They're double doors too, so picture the scene as he opens one door, uses the little hook to keep it open, then does the same with the other door so that both sets of doors are wide open, like he's ready for an entire mob of people to start walking through the entrance. But instead of an entire mob of people, there came only one, although I'm guessing she weighed about as much as 3 or 4 other people. This woman was in a mobility scooter, or more accurately, spilling out from over a mobility scooter. I really don't mean to be cruel here, but she was disgusting. Objectively disgusting. She couldn't have weighed any pound less than 600, and her size was such that she actually needed an oxygen tank attached to her scooter, a clear plastic line running from it up into her nostrils. She scoots her way to the counter with her man and proceeds to just smile at him while he orders something for her. Something being the single biggest order I'd ever taken down in the entire time I've worked there. And I'm talking even more than the frat boys who come in drunk one Saturday night. The order came to just shy of $150 and took about 20 minutes to prepare. Keep in mind that the average serving time in our restaurant at that period was like 6 minutes. 6 minutes for an entire bag of meals, and this order took 20, with every member of our staff preparing it. When it was done, the worst part commenced. She scooted herself over to a table with her man, who then proceeded to feed her pretty much the entire order in the space of about 10 minutes. It was absolutely disgusting. But honestly, I couldn't decide if it was worse that we were bearing witness to that whole thing, or that the guy seemed to take immense pleasure in making a freaking mess while he was feeding her. By the time they left, there were fries and ranch dressing everywhere, all over the floor. Tons of fries had been, crushed underfoot in that way that you have to really scrub to get them up. The whole thing added a bunch of extra time to our cleanup. But that's not the thing that scared me. It's how into the whole feeding thing they were. How the woman was hurtling towards an early grave, and seemed to be loving it. A wild thing happened to my girlfriend and I at Burger King a couple of weeks ago. We ordered a bunch of food, got our drinks, and sat down at a table near the corner of the restaurant. A minute after we ordered, a guy goes up to the counter and orders. He wasn't out of place, so I didn't notice anything about him for a few minutes. He sits down where you typically would sit if you were waiting for a to-go order, and the first thing that got our attention was a kid, maybe 8 or 9 years old, ran past him. He loudly says, "Atheist!" at the kid in an accusing tone. He then was milling about, talking in a radio-like box about how he needed to move to the North Pole. It was seconds after this that I noticed that he was staring at us. As I made brief eye contact with him several times to check that he was indeed staring. He then walked over and sat at a table right next to my girlfriend and I. Great, I thought. He then starts babbling to some imaginary person saying, I don't know. Homeless and mentally ill are common in this area, especially this side of town, so we are on edge but not surprised at his behavior. The lady working calls for order 179. The guy says, "They were before me," motioning to us, since he apparently forgot his number. The lady said, 2 cheeseburgers, and he again insisted it might be our food. By this time I realized what was happening, and I said, "Oh yeah, we are 178. At this point, he snapped and totally lost it on me. "You Californians need to learn to open your mouths," as he grabbed his food and began walking in my direction to the exit. I mustered up what fight-or-flight response I had in the moment to say, "Have a nice day, see ya," as he approached the door, and Crazy Guy continues to cuss at me, calling me names. A few words were exchanged, but I made sure to stand my ground but not say anything off-color as he made his way out. As he left, he apparently continued to scream at us through the window. All employees and customers in that place were looking at me in shock, and I was shocked too. The part that bothers me about this interaction is that in the moment, as he walked past me, I saw in his eyes how removed from reality he was, whether that be because of drugs or mental illness or a combination of both. He was also much larger than me, so if he wanted to hurt me or my girlfriend, he likely could have. Needless to say, every time I go to that Burger King from now on, I make sure I scope out the area before going in. I've been pretty heavily involved in various fast food jobs since I was old enough to work, and I am now a manager down here in Florida. We experience a fair share of problems on a daily basis, but the worst has to be people who are using or addicted to drugs. They're everywhere in our industry. I mean it. The fun never stops for fast food workers. I have seen deals in the back of the kitchen, in the parking lot, in the bathroom, or walk-in. It used to be worse before my time, apparently, but honestly, I find that pretty hard to believe. My boyfriend of 10 years, who is way higher up the management chain than me, told me in the old days they would all hang out in employee parking even if it wasn't their shift, and just everyone would constantly switch cars while doing various substances. The first week I became a deputy manager, I had to cuss an employee out when she came in to work high on crystal. Not about her coming in on meth, for not doing any work. My boyfriend also tells me he came in and worked in the kitchen for a bit when it wasn't even his shift because he was rolling. Lastly, to this day, 90% of the employees come in with eyes redder than Satan's wiener. I used to be one of them, but a higher-up singled me out, and now I don't do it to spite them. This is most fast food places, but nothing can prepare you for walking into a bathroom to do a routine check and seeing a person's legs sticking out from under the stall. I remember being super tired that day. Just one of those shifts you're just trying to make it through instead of actually putting in any real work. I lazily grabbed the cleaning supplies from the cleaning closet, wandered into the woman's bathroom with my pen in hand, ready to sign my initials on the sheet to show we were being diligent and all that stuff. I straight up dropped the pen when I saw that girl's legs sticking out from under the stall, then ran. Ran back to the manager's office to call the paramedics. They kept asking if the girl was still breathing, and I had no idea. It wasn't a cordless phone, so I had to grab another team member to get them to check for me. They did not take it well. I don't think they'd ever seen another person on the verge of death like that, lips turning blue and stuff, and I had to send them home early when all was said and done. I don't really blame her either. It was a horrifying thing to behold. The paramedics showed up, and luckily this was at a time when the use of Narcan was becoming increasingly prevalent. For those that don't know, Narcan is a nasal spray that can reverse the effects of an opioid overdose. So luckily for us, and the girl in question, no one died that day. But the thing that sticks with me is the look I saw in that girl's eyes when we opened up the stall so the medics could get to her. I had to shimmy up the bathroom stall before jumping down, careful not to land on her so I could unlock the stall door. The medics wanted to kick it in, but it was quicker and much less expensive for me to just climb over. But when I did, I kid you not, the wide-eyed look of fear in that girl's eyes, the cold sweat clinging to her brow as she crept further and further towards death's door. I had never been so creeped out in my entire life.
My definition of a good hotel is a place where I could be comfortable to stay at. It's a quote I've been holding up until I experienced something out of the ordinary, an experience that I really don't want to happen again. Anyway, it started when everything changed. People need to be quarantined due to a pandemic going on around the world, and because of this, our normal means of transportation has been quite difficult. Fortunately, we were given the opportunity to stay at a nearby place for us to be able to get to work easily. In that way, we can sustain our needs due to this national emergency. I got to the reception, and she gave me a key. It's basically a small room in an apartment. It consists of a window and a door that leads to a small bathroom. It's decent. Nothing much, but it will definitely help me since I currently live 40 minutes away from my job. The first day I arrived was very comfortable and pretty normal, but I have to make sure that the place where I stay was clean because I'm the type of person who really hated dirty surroundings. So I decided to clean the place up myself without the help of housekeeping. I mopped the floor, fixed the bed, and wiped the window until I noticed that there was this tiny black paper. By the looks of it, it was attached to the wall, long enough to have cobwebs all over it. I took it off from the wall and spent the day cleaning the whole room, not knowing that this will be the last normal day of my entire stay in the apartment. The following day, I had this nightmare. Everything in my dream was all pitch black and I couldn't really see anything, only but pure darkness. But as I turned around, I saw a silhouette of a man sitting on a chair, singing something that sounded like a cradle song. I just stared at him and noticed that he wanted to get up, but his feet were tied up to the chair. I woke up normally, although the scene still lingers at the back of my mind. But since I don't really believe in the paranormal, I decided to shake it off and thought it was just probably a normal nightmare. On the third day, I had the same nightmare. Same man, same cradle, same position. But there was something still off about this guy. I leaned forward, eyes squinting together as I saw this man was no longer tied from his chair. I got startled as this man started to slowly stand up. This dream was becoming way too realistic. I felt that this man was approaching me. I desperately tried to move but noticed that my whole body was stuck against the bed. I struggled and struggled until I finally gave in. This guy was trying to touch my feet with his hands. I vividly felt it. I was frightened. I just couldn't feel anything other than the fact that I could only shut my eyes and try to wake up. Eventually, long after I woke up, it was 3:08 in the morning. I prayed and listened to some songs to forget the terror that still haunts me. But it's getting worse. The song that I was playing got switched to an old song. The lights suddenly shut off. And I saw the man with my own two eyes, sitting on my chair by the nearby window. He was about to stand up and come towards me. I was really scared and almost cried. I covered myself with a blanket and prayed until the music went back to normal. Then suddenly, the lights turned back on. I was really exhausted and barely even breathing because of the terror I experienced. And I didn't know what to do. I tried to ask the front desk about the history of that room. She couldn't even tell me. I told her what I experienced, and I saw the fear in her eyes. but she was trying to change the story and make up certain things in order for me to stop. I still don't know what's the story behind that room, but what's bothering me is that what if I didn't remove the black paper that was stuck to the wall? Will I still experience what happened? Or was it really there, waiting for another victim?